Hey folks, welcome back. So once again, we're continuing our journey into Star Trek Adventures 2nd Edition, this time with the starter set. So this is obviously significantly more substantial than the Quickstart, which was just a 48-page booklet. So we'll focus on the new stuff that's included within the starter set and look at all the cool widgets that you get with it. So we take a look at the back here. They urge you to seek out the unknown and play right out of the box. So it shows you a indication of the contents here. We have a punch-out set of tokens for determination, momentum, and threat. We've got pre-gens and a Constitution class ship. We've got our rules booklet and campaign booklet. And the rules booklet is 48 pages, so that's just for the rules. That's the same size as the entire Quickstart set, so we've obviously got a lot more rules in there. The campaign booklet is a 60-page booklet with an epic 3-part campaign, Infinite Combinations, which guides you through the rules as you play, so you begin exploring the galaxy straight out of the box, and that's really nice. So you can learn the system together with your players by playing through these adventures. You also get nice laminated versions of your ship sheet and character sheets. You get 4 double-sided rules reference sheets, 5 20-sided dice in a unique color exclusive to this starter set, and you get your tokens. You get momentum tokens for 6 different civilizations, 36 threat tokens in total, and 9 determination tokens, which are larger, as you'll see. So we'll pop it open right away and see what you get inside. Now, one thing you'll notice is different about this starter set as opposed to 1E is we don't have character tokens or the maps. That was one of the features that we had in 1E, which are not replicated here. But we have these nice determination tokens, and we have all the dice we actually need to play because we've removed the conflict dice. So I think that's one side benefit to changing to only D20s. However, I do miss the conflict dice as I've noted before, but they're a nice color. We can take a look at these. We can see they've got this nice sort of aquamarine sort of color. I don't know what to call this. The one is marked with the Federation symbol to indicate double successes. And there's your nasty 20 that gives you complications. Quite light, but nice and engraved. And I like the color and the little addition of the Starfleet symbol as well. So it's nice to get a box where you've got your full max of 5 D20s. Obviously, you can go higher than that still with things like assistance from your starship and so on. But still, that's all you really need to go ahead. We've got 2 escaped momentum tokens here, but we'll look at some of these. I'll grab a random selection of the momentum tokens. And these are kind of dual purpose. So when the red alert side is showing, you can consider those threat tokens. When you flip to the other side, you'll get a civilization. When they're on that side, they are your player momentum tokens. And you can see we've got Klingons, Federation, we've got Cardassians, we've got Romulans, and we've got the Ferengi. That's the Orions, I believe. So we've got our 6 civilizations, each with 6 tokens. So basically when you're spending momentum, you'll have them flipped to whatever the civilization side is, and when they're being used as threat, you show the red alert side. So that's convenient. And 36 tokens is plenty. For most cases, I doubt you're ever really going to need more than that. If you've got that much threat as a GM, then you're hoarding it. You should be spending it and causing drama for your players. That's important. I'm going to try and actually close this bag properly so they don't escape next time I open the box. And then separately, I put the determination tokens, and these are handy to have. Players often forget that they have determination, so it's really nice that they've broken these tokens out so that you can give them to the players and they know they've got it sitting there staring them in the face, and they can remember to spend it when something they're doing aligns with the mission directive or their values as provided in the rules. On the other side, it says determination, so you can have that side facing up and you can use it, turn it over like that, and if you manage to recover it, you can bring it back like this. So it's just a handy little player aid that I think is really actually quite useful, given how many times I've seen players forget to use determination at the table. So a physical reminder is a useful thing if you are playing face-to-face. If you're playing online, then you'll need to come up with some other solution. My solution has just been to actually remind the players, don't forget, you have determination, use it sometimes. Then we've got our starter set rules booklet. So the cover image here mirrors the cover image on the standard edition of the core rulebook, which you will see. Well, you won't see it later on because I have the limited edition, but never mind. So we'll go flip through this quickly and we'll see. We've got, once again, an introduction to role-playing at the beginning. Then general operations, which is how things work in general tasks and play. Then again, we have conflict. Then we have starship fundamentals and starship conflict. So that's where we really get into the new stuff. So we'll do a quick run through of the basics again. Obviously, you need your tokens, which we have here. 20-sided dice, which are also included this time. And we have our character sheets as well. So you just need to have some paper and pencils or pens to make notes when needed. Keep track of traits and scenes or things that you might need to do or clues that you find. And they remind you of the core mechanics, so you add your attribute plus department that best fit the desired action to get a target number. Then you roll 2d20 as default, and you check die rolls equal to or less than the target number, which counts as a success. If you roll a 1, that's 2 successes. If you have a focus in a relevant area to the task, then any number that you roll below the department number will count as a critical success and give you 2 successes instead of 1. But you could buy more D20 d20s using momentum, which you gain by having additional successes more than you need to succeed at a given task. Tasks have a difficulty from 0 to 5, which tells you how many successes you need to pass them. Then we have the outline of our characters. Once again, their attributes are control, daring, fitness, insight, presence, and reason, and their departments are related to their levels of training in these areas, such as command, con, which is piloting, engineering, which is resolving mechanical or tech problems, security, which is defending yourself or conducting investigations, medicine for healing, and science for your understanding of the universe. And then your focuses will be outlined on your character sheet, and you can create them when you're making your own character, and they will specify certain sub-areas of knowledge, like tactical systems, warp field dynamics, xenoarchaeology, or whatever. And once again, they talk about scenes and traits being the equivalent of truths in Octo Cthulhu and some of the other games. They're basically a word or a phrase that represents something key about the environment or the scene that you're in, and they can affect what you're trying to do in that scene. So if you have a trait that says darkness, maybe it makes things that require vision, like shooting at somebody, increase their difficulty, whereas you can potentially change that trait by spending momentum and finding a way to turn on power to the station and get the lights back on, and then you get rid of the darkness trait because it's no longer true. So the trait has to represent something that's true about the scene at the moment. And it will affect different characters differently depending on their own traits and abilities. You can have potent traits, which are traits that have levels beyond 1, which will have increased effect. So if you have smoke, it can become smoke 2, which will add 2 to your difficulty to shoot through thick smoke. If you use an action or roll a task to reduce a trait, you can either remove a trait entirely if it's not got a potency, or if it's got a potency, you can reduce it or increase it by 1, depending. Then you talk about the basic task mechanic and when you decide to roll, which is critical. So if the character could succeed when there's not any particular challenge in the way or timing difficulties or anything like that, then just go ahead and let them succeed. If it's something they can't do given the situation or the traits in the environment, then just say no. If it's a maybe, that's when the dice come out. They also mentioned about rerolls, so you can choose the number of dice to reroll depending on the circumstances. Sometimes you can only reroll 1 dice or a specific die, say an assist from the computer of the ship or something like that. If you spend determination, you can reroll up to your entire dice pool if you spend it after you roll, but you can always choose how many dice you want to reroll, but you're stuck with the results that you get, including any complications. And they give you example difficulties here of the 0 to 5 range, and task difficulty, of course, can be affected by traits in the scene. And the player should always know the difficulty of what they're attempting. That way they know whether they need to spend momentum or try and get assistance from somebody, and it helps to build up the scene in an appropriately Star Trek-y kind of way and allows for teamwork. Difficulty 0 tasks are really important in 2E, especially, as I mentioned in the previous video, because momentum is bearing a heavy load in this revision of the game. Use momentum for a lot of things, including adding damage to your attacks, reducing damage from attacks, healing people, all kinds of stuff. So difficulty 0 or 1 tasks early in an adventure are quite key because they allow your players to build up a momentum pool. They need to have access to that momentum, otherwise the game could get stressingly difficult. And these are Starfleet officers, they should be competent. So make sure as a GM that you remember to allow some difficulty 0 scan the system type rolls when they enter the area of the adventure to allow them to build up some momentum and get some things going. On a difficulty 0 roll, then any successes count as momentum, obviously. And they give you a nice breakdown of the whole task system, which I won't go through again, as we've done that before. And the key rule that anytime you need to round something up, if there's a fraction involved, you always round up, no matter what the fraction is. And there are the ways that you can improve the odds on your roll. So this is adding dice to your roll up to a maximum of 5 and spend momentum, which you get, as I said, from extra successes beyond the difficulty of a given task. A first extra die will cost you 1 momentum, the second one will cost you 2, and the third costs 3. You can also give the GM threat in the same amount to buy additional dice, and they can then use that threat against you in ways they talk about later to make your life more difficult. You can spend determination, which will give you 1 die in your dice pool that's already considered to have rolled a 1, so it already gives you 2 successes right off the bat. Or you can spend determination after to re-roll any number of dice in your pool. Finally, you have talents, some of which will allow you to reduce the cost of buying additional d20s or give you re-rolls for certain numbers of dice on certain tasks. Then they talk about assistance, so the leader of a task will do a full task roll, and the first assistance that you get, whether it's from the ship, if you're on the starship and it's something starship related, or from another character, that one is free. Any additional assistance will cost 1 momentum or 1 threat, depending which way you want to play it. An assistant to a task will just roll an additional d20 for themselves, and if they succeed, that will be added to the task leader's dice pool result. However, they don't have to use the same attribute, department, or focus as the main participant in the roll, or even the other assistant. Depending on how they want to assist, they could argue for different attribute, department, or focuses to be used. Of course, that's up to the GM's approval. The opposed task, so if you're trying to do something, you're the active character, and if you're trying to resist something, you're the reactive character. In this case, it's pretty simple. The the reactive character who is defending will set the difficulty. So they make a task roll, but they don't have a specific difficulty. They just count how many successes they score. That becomes then the difficulty for the active character. If the active character succeeds, they get their goal, and if they get extra successes, they can spend momentum from it as per usual, or add them to the pool if they want. If the active character fails, the reactive character generates 1 momentum for each success less than the difficulty that the opponent scored. After all that's done, then you look at complications. And complications, what happens when you roll a 20, or you can enhance the complication range to make it easier in certain situations if you're the GM. Once the task has been resolved, the complication will cause something unfortunate to happen. However, if you don't want to deal with a complication, you can essentially delay the consequences. You can pay 2 threat to the game master to buy off the complication. So you can spend 2 threat to buy off the complication. So you give that 2 threat to the GM, complication goes away, but now they have 2 more threat to use against you in the future. Then we've got the complication range, which can vary between 1 and 5, up to the GM's discretion, but they have to have some kind of justification for that. They can't just do it arbitrarily. Typically, this would be for things where randomness plays a larger role. So an example I used before was, if you're flying through an asteroid field or a comet tail where there's lots of unpredictable moving bodies, and even a talented pilot may be able to succeed in what they want to do, but still get dinged by a bit of debris, which could cause complication elsewhere on the ship. Then you talk about spending momentum. You can only have 6 momentum in your shared pool. If you get momentum and decide not to spend all of it, if you have less than 6 in the pool, you can save it into that, which other players can then use on their turns, for example, or for their tasks. But if you get momentum and you already have a maximum pool, then you need to spend that momentum right away. And if you get bonus momentum due to certain situations, items, or talents, then you need to spend that right away. It cannot be saved into the pool. Common momentum spends are listed here for players. You can create an opportunity, which is buying d20s. You can create a trait with 2 momentum, but it must relate to the task you just passed, and it must be something that would result from your actions. You can keep the initiative in an action scene instead of handing over the initiative to your opponent, which normally happens at the end of your turn. You can obtain information, and you can do this multiple times. So you spend 1 momentum to ask the GM a single question. You have to answer truthfully, but not necessarily in a clear way. They could be vague about it. You can spend 2 momentum to reduce the time it takes to complete a task if you're outside of combat. If you're in combat, you can spend 2 momentum to take an additional major action, but you can only do it once, and it increases the difficulty by 1. And you can also spend 1 momentum to take an additional minor action, but you can only do that minor action once per turn. So you can do a number of minor actions, but each one of a certain type can only be done once per turn. And they go through the details of these particular options and how you save momentum into the pool if you choose not to spend it right away. On the other side, you have threat, which is what the GM uses to make your life more difficult. So players can use threat instead of momentum if they don't have momentum to do certain things, but only for buying d20s or for keeping the initiative in combat. These are immediate spends and are allowed, therefore, to be threat spends, where you give threat to the GM in the same amount as you would spend momentum. Now, the GM will start each adventure with 2 threat for each player character present, but that could be higher if it's a particularly stressful scenario. Player characters can also, of course, buy off complications to give more threat to the GM. Sometimes they have to involuntarily give threat to the GM if they are doing something that escalates the situation. Lethal force in combat, that automatically adds 1 to threat. If you carry big and obvious scary weapons like phaser rifles or batleths, then those will add threat due to escalation as well. Then we have threat spends that the game master can do, so they can create a complication by spending 2 threat and creating a negative trait. They can trigger or cause problems with the scene or environment by spending threat. Buy off complications for NPCs by spending 2 threat. They can use the threat pool for the same things that PCs use momentum for their NPCs. It's a mirror image of the momentum pool in that respect, and that allows for an interesting back and forth between the players and GMs, and it's nice for players that they can see the pool of threat, they can see it being spent, not necessarily with consequences right away, but they'll know that the GM has something in the wings, and that adds to the drama and tension, which is really what this game is all about, and what the 2d20 system is all about. The game master can also add to threat with NPC momentum in the same way that extra successes give momentum to PCs, they give threat to the pool for the GM if it's an NPC. And threatening circumstances, so a difficult environment or the introduction of certain major NPCs, or things like, the NPCs raising the alarm on a ship, could cause the threat to raise automatically. Then we got determination, which I mentioned many people forget they have. You begin each mission with 1 determination for a player character, and you can't have more than 3 at any one time. But you can only spend determination when what you're going to do aligns with one of your values on your character sheet, or aligns with the mission's directives, which will be laid out for you at the beginning of the mission by your GM. Spending determination, you get 2 possible benefits. You can either spend it on a task roll after you roll the dice to re-roll any number of d20s in your dice pool. You can spend determination on a task roll before the dice are rolled, and you can then select a single d20 from your pool and set it to to a 1, giving yourself an automatic 2 successes right from the get-go. Then we get into the conflict rules. So here we're in turn-based time, rounds and turns. A round is a set of character turns in which every single character in the scene, NPC and PC alike, has taken 1 turn. And your turn will consist of a major action and possibly several minor actions. By default, the GM will choose a single player character to take the first action. However, they can spend a threat to have an NPC take the first turn instead. Or if the NPCs have the drop on the PCs, like they've ambushed them in some way, then they can start first, if it makes sense narratively. So the turn order is once a player from one side goes, then somebody from the other side will go, unless that side chooses to spend 2 momentum to keep the initiative, to hand the initiative to another player character instead. But no character may take more than 1 turn per round in a conflict, and if you spend to keep the initiative, you can only do that once in a row. You can't keep doing it so that all your characters go one after another. Now, stress is a feature of every main character and major NPC. Basically, you can withstand a certain amount of stress equal to your fitness attribute plus certain other things like your species talent and abilities. When you suffer an injury, then you will have a severity to that injury, and that will determine how much stress you must endure if you choose to do so. And we'll get to that detail later. If you endure more than your maximum amount of stress, you suffer whatever stress you can, fill up the track, and then you get a complication, and you become fatigued at that point. When you have maximum stress, you can no longer suffer any more stress, and you pick 1 attribute, which will then automatically fail if you use any roll with that attribute, and all of the tasks have 1 difficulty. Now, you can recover stress through spending momentum to remove 1 stress from yourself or 1 ally who can hear you, but you can't do more than 3 stress removal at once with this. You can take a rest, so a quick breather gives you 4 stress back. A break of a half an hour up to a couple of hours would be removing 8 stress, and a full sleep will give you all your stress back. But you may not get good quality sleep or good quality rest if you're in a, say, a hazardous environment or a dangerous alien base. Then they talk about the battlefield, which is a zone-based system, so it's very good for theater of the mind. So each zone will be effectively an important area of the scene, like could be a room on a starship if you're fighting aboard a ship, could be part of an environment which has a certain property if you're fighting outside. Track a character's place by noting which zone they are in, and you should be able to do that with natural language because each zone should have something of interest in it. So you could say, I'm near the computer console. There is no specific size to a zone. They can change depending on the visibility and the properties of the environment that you're in. So clearing in a forest might be one big zone, whereas within the trees you could have a lot of small zones to represent the split visibility. You also have ranges for weapons and for movement. So reach means that you're right up next to somebody, and that allows you to make melee attacks. But if you want to do anything that isn't a melee attack, it increases the difficulty by 1. You won't be able to do a movement major action. Close means you're just in the same zone as another character. You're not necessarily within reach. Medium means you are 1 zone away, so you're an adjacent zone to them. Long is 2 zones away, and extreme is 3 or more. So different weapons will have different difficulties depending on the range and so forth. Now, movement through difficult terrain will cost you momentum, and they give examples of difficult terrain, and the more difficult it is, the more momentum it will cost. The same with obstacles like walls or barriers. If you don't have momentum to spend, then you'll need to do a sprint task. Difficulty 0, fitness plus security. Any successes become momentum, which you can then spend on moving through the terrain. But of course, that will take up an action if you're doing it during a structured time encounter or conflict. Cover. So this is one of the most common terrain effects. So basically it turns a range attack into an opposed task, so that gives you a better chance of resisting the attack. And it may be that a zone as a whole will provide cover, or just a certain object in that zone which will have to be within reach of. Similarly, you could have interactive objects like doors or other terrain features that you can interact with using a minor action or a major action if it's more complex. And during combat, you have some minor actions that you can take, and you can take more than 1 if you spend your momentum. By default, take 1 minor action per turn, but additional ones only cost 1 momentum each. You can do aiming, which allows you to reroll a d20 on an attack. You can draw an item or pick up an item within reach. You can interact with something on a simple basis like pressing a control panel or issuing a voice command. You can move up to 1 zone within medium range, but you can't do this in the same turn as a movement major action. And if you're within reach of an enemy, you cannot do a movement minor action. You can prepare for a task, and some weapons and items will require a prepare minor action to be used before you can use that item or weapon. Or you can go from prone to standing or from standing to prone. If you drop to the ground, you're a smaller target for medium range or farther. If you're standing, then you are a bigger target, but you have the ability to move. Now, major action is a number you can do here. You can assist a character with their task using the assistance rules laid out earlier. You can make an attack, the rules for which are given in the next section. You can create a trait or increase or decrease the potency of a trait in the scene or remove one that's already present. So you roll attribute plus department and focus based on what you're doing with a difficulty of 2. You can direct a character, so you take a major action, spend 1 momentum, select one ally who can hear you, and who immediately attempts a single major action, and you assist them by rolling 1d20 with your control plus command. Pretty handy, and good for commanding officers, obviously. If you are a medical officer and have the right skills, you can do first aid. So you can attempt to revive a defeated character within reach. So you do daring plus medicine difficulty 2. If you pass, they will be not defeated anymore, but they will have an injury. Or if they have an injury, you can try to treat it. You do a daring plus medicine task with a difficulty equal to the injury's severity. If you pass, then the injury is treated. You can also use guard. You defend yourself with insight plus security difficulty 0, and success increases the difficulty of any attacks against you by 1 until the start of your next turn. You can confer the benefits of this to an ally within reach instead of yourself, but that increases the difficulty by 1, and the benefit lasts until the start of your ally's next turn. You can do other tasks, which is just general stuff that is complicated enough to require major action. You can pass and do nothing. You can ready an action, which allows you to interrupt another character's turn. So this is the typical, I want to stand ready with my phaser, and if the Romulan attacks my XO, then I will take a shot at him right away. And then if that trigger comes to pass, you will interrupt their turn and take your readied action. If that trigger never occurs, then your readied action goes away, and you move on to the next round. And then you got your sprint action outlined before, which is fitness plus con as difficulty 0 to generate momentum to cross the terrain. And you move 2 zones to within long range rather than a single zone. Make an attack. You choose a weapon and target. Choose whether it's going to be a stunning blow or a deadly blow. Melee attack, you can attempt at anybody within reach. Range attack is anybody you can see. For melee attacks, you roll daring plus security difficulty 1, but it's an opposed task if the target is aware of you. A range attack is control plus security difficulty 2. If the opponent has cover, then they resist with their own control plus security. And then you resolve the attack. If you succeed, then you get an injury inflicted upon your target. If the attack was an opposed task and the target won, then they can either move out of reach if they're in melee, or spend 2 momentum to counterattack and inflict an injury upon you. A character who suffers an injury may avoid injury if that option is available to them, which is not for minor NPCs, but it is available for player characters and normal secondary characters. Now, injuries. So the exact nature of an injury is described as a character trait, which represents damage onto the character. All sources of injury also have a severity, normally between 1 and 5, and that tells you how rough the injury is. If you succeed at an attack, you can spend 2 momentum to increase the severity by 1, which is repeatable, but you can't increase the severity by more than 2. When a character suffers an injury, they're also defeated, and they fall prone and can't take any actions for the rest of the scene, but of course there are ways to recover from that, as we've seen. Now, you can also choose to avoid injury, so you take stress instead, and you won't be defeated, but you will take damage to your stress track according to the severity of the injury. It represents you evading or resisting the attack. Now, NPCs, they're treated differently from PCs in this regard. So a minor PC, if they get an injury, they're instantly defeated, and they can't choose to avoid injury. If they are stunned, they are not just knocked out. If it's a deadly attack, then they are completely dead or vaporized. A notable NPC or supporting character with 1 or more values will suffer injury as normal. They can avoid injury as PCs do, but only have half the amount of the initial stress, while a notable NPC may spend threat equal to severity to avoid injury, but can only do so once per scene. Finally, a major NPC receives injury as normal and may avoid injury by spending threat equal to severity. Protection reduces the severity of an incoming injury. Then we have recovery and healing, which we talked about before, but there's another element here of longer term healing. So this was a control plus medicine task with a difficulty of X, and takes X hours, where X is the severity in both cases. And you add 1 to the difficulty and the complication range if the injury was not treated. Then we have a summary of your combat momentum spends, so you can add severity with 2 momentum. You can alter a trait with 2 momentum. You can take an extra minor action with 1. You can keep the initiative with 2, which is an immediate spend, so you can use threat for that as well. You can obtain information, 1 momentum, which is asking the GM a question about the scene. An extra major action is 2 momentum. You can disarm with 1 to 2 momentum if the enemy is within reach. So it costs 1 momentum if the weapon is held in one hand. If it's two-handed, you spend 2 momentum to disarm them. And finally, you can buy D20s. This is 1 to 3 momentum, depending on how many dice you want. It's an immediate spend, so you can use threat instead, and it's repeatable, of course. You do it up to 3 times. Your combat equipment, your weapons will have a weapon type, either melee or ranged. They will have a type of injury, some with multiple options, which will be listed. They have a severity of injuries that they inflict. They have a size, one-handed or two-handed. A two-handed weapon can be used one-handed, but the difficulty will increase by 1. They also have qualities, and those include things like accurate. So if you perform the aim minor action with an accurate weapon, you can re-roll up to 2 d20s in your dice pool. An area attack means that if you succeed, you can target additional targets in the same zone and hit them by spending 1 momentum for each additional target, and that's repeatable. You can also succeed at a cost with an area attack. Charge means that if you perform the prepare minor action before attacking, you can add the area, intense, or piercing quality. If you choose area, the attack severity is reduced by 1. Cumbersome means that you have to take the prepare minor action on the same turn to use the weapon. Debilitating means that treating or healing injuries caused by the weapon is increased by 1. Grenades is a throwable explosive. You can attack a target up to medium range and have enough grenades for 3 separate attacks. Hidden X means that in order for an enemy to find the weapon, if you use a minor action to conceal it, if they want to find it, they need to roll Insight plus Security or Reason plus Security with a difficulty of X, equal to the value of your hidden quality. Inaccurate means that you do not benefit from the minor action at all. Intense means that you can use the momentum spends to increase severity, while you only spend 1 momentum rather than 2. Piercing means that the weapon ignores protection, passes right through it. Then we get into starships. So here we have a bunch of new rules. You need them to get starships working, but they do work similarly to how characters work, and their sheets are very similar. So actions taken aboard a starship are no different than actions taken anywhere else. There are no innate or inherent benefits, but depending on where the ship is, some actions will be available and some won't be. So for example, if you're in sick bay, you could do certain medical procedures, while transporter room allows you to do transporter stuff. Actions taken within a starship always benefit from the ship's presence in nature, so the ship will assist you on any tasks that you're doing that use ship systems. When a task is needed for an action taken using a starship, it's typical for the ship to assist, rolling a d20 against its own target number and contributing any successes or complications to the character performing the action. And to do this, you give the ship a target number by adding 1 ship system rating and 1 ship department rating, and it always treats the task it attempts as having an applicable focus. No more than 1 character may assist on the ship action unless the GM provides permission, and a ship action may be further bolstered using reserve power, which we'll get to later on. Now your starship typically has 1 or more traits, so they could have, for example, cultural traits. They could have traits like Federation Starship, Galaxy Class. The Enterprise D has the 5th ship to bear the name trait. 5th of its name means that it has a storied history and may well be recognized across the galaxy, for example. Your ship systems, you've got comms, computers, engines, sensors, structure, and weapons. Then we have an outline of these systems and the different uses. So your communications, computers, engines, it's all pretty straightforward stuff. I mean, comms you use to try and jam opponent communications or try to communicate with somebody else. You might use the engines to go to warp or pursue another ship, for example. It's all pretty sensible, straightforward stuff. Then you have your departments, which are command, con, engineering, science, medicine, security, just like characters. And starship focuses, they don't have specific focuses, but instead, as mentioned before, any d20 rolled on behalf of the ship, rolling equal to or less than the relevant department, scores 2 successes automatically. So they're treated as having focuses on all the time. Starships do have talents, however, representing areas of design and equipment focus, and they provide similar benefits to character talents. And then we have starship scales. Most ships are between 3 and 6. 1 and 2 are exclusively used for small craft like shuttles and runabouts, and anything above 6, we're getting into real crazy stuff like the Deridex class warbirds, Borg spheres, the Odyssey class. 8+, we're getting Borg cubes and city ships and Deep Space Nine and stuff like that. So the scale most importantly relates to the ship resistance. The ship with a greater scale can resist attacks more easily and withstand greater amounts of damage before systems are damaged or destroyed. So that's the key thing. So resistance, starships are designed to be resilient because they have to survive in the vacuum of space. The resistance is a combination of their hull and space frame composition, the effectiveness of the structural integrity field, and deflector shields, and that's represented as resistance, which reduces incoming damage. The resistance is equal to half the scale rounded up, plus a bonus based on the ship's structure rating, according to this table. So this is very important to remember. I've seen several threads on forums where people think that the ship's resistance is just equal to the scale, and then you end up with really big numbers that it's really hard to damage the ships. Then you've got shields as well. So shields are reduced when you suffer damage, and they can be replenished through the actions of crew and with time. A ship will have shields equal to its structure plus its scale and security, with other factors possibly affecting this. And shields have 2 breakthrough points similar to an extended task. One at halfway along the track and another at 3/4 the way along the track. So a ship has a certain amount of reserve power. A ship will always begin a scene with reserve power, something the ship either has or hasn't. Ship systems are allocated sufficient energy from the reactors as a matter of routine, but if you use a reroute power major action to divert reserve power to a specific system, the next time the ship uses that system to assist on a task attempt, the ship's assist die is counted as if it had rolled a 1 automatically. However, each complication rolled also counts as 2 complications instead, as the excess power overloads and damages systems. A few actions cannot be taken unless reserve power is spent, and those include regenerating shields, rerouting power, and going to warp. Then we've got your crew support. So the total number of crew support available is determined by the ship. Spending crew support brings members of the crew from that massive background activity into the forefront, putting focus on them and making making them an active and significant part of a mission. A ship's standard allotment of crew support is equal to the ship's scale, but can be modified by talents and other things. One common question among players is how many shuttlecraft do we have? The answer is typically as many as you need. That being said, note that the ship's capacity is different than the ship's small craft readiness, the number of small craft the ship can have activated in a scene. A ship can support a finite number of active small craft missions through their launch bays. It can be modified by talents as well. Then you've got starship conflict. So again, we're using environments and zones, but in this case, environments will be things like, if you're in an atmosphere or in a nebula or other things that can affect space combat in some way. And vessels will be in zones, just like characters are. And distances are marked similarly to characters. So you have the contact distance, which is mainly used for ships docking with one another or with star bases, shuttlecraft on approach to land, and similar. Moving to contact too quickly can be dangerous, though as high-speed collisions can cause considerable damage. So be aware of that. Close means you're in the same zone as another vessel. Medium is one zone away. Long range is 2 zones, and extreme is 3 or more. So the only thing that's different here is instead of reach, we have contact, and it works a little bit differently. There's also the option of going to warp. So for a ship to go to warp, you take your reserve power, reroute it to engines, take the repair minor action if in combat. Once you've done that, the character at the helm must do control plus con with a difficulty of 1, assisted by the ship's engine plus con. And in combat, this is a major action. The ship may move in one of 2 ways. It can move a number of zones up to the ship's engine score, or it can immediately leave the battlefield to end the scene, but the enemy might try to pursue. If they want to pursue, the pursuing ship must also go to warp in the same procedure, and must score more successes than the fleeing ship scored. If they do, they'll quickly catch up, and then the crew of the fleeing ship must choose how they respond. This task may succeed at cost, but if it fails, the ship either does not move or it moves as above but suffers an additional complication. Then we have some details about NPCs and starship operations. Now, operating a starship as a GM is a little bit difficult because the crew aboard your ship, who are the PCs, they'll be able to do things on their individual turns. And the NPC ships will have crews as well, but you don't necessarily want to deal with 18 different characters for 3 different ships or whatever. So you don't track individual NPC crew members. Instead, each NPC ship will take several turns each round, 1 turn per point of the ship's scale. That represents the action of the individual crew. Each NPC ship may only attempt 1 task assisted by each system per round, but you can spend a threat when the ship takes a turn to ignore this limit for the current action. NPC ships do not have reserve power, so they don't have that option. Then they get the vessel crew quality. So a basic crew has attributes of 8 and departments of 1, proficient 9 and 2, talented 10 and 3, exceptional 11 and 4. So the quality of the crew, that just applies to all the actions that the PCs would normally do. So you don't have to look at a bunch of character sheets as well as your ship sheet if you're running an enemy ship, which is helpful for the GM. Sensors. So in ideal circumstances, a ship can scan to detect vessels, objects, and phenomena over a certain size or magnitude for several light years in every direction. Long-range sensors are potent in this regard, but there's no hard and fast rules for this, but the game master should adjust the amount of detail provided at different ranges. And talk about movement and difficult terrain. So this could be some sort of obstacle that inhibits your movement, like planetary gravity wells or debris fields. So like with PCs, you need to spend momentum to get through these. If you don't have momentum to spend, then you'll need to do a maneuver major action to generate momentum with the difficulty 0 control plus con task. Then any success you get become momentum, which you can then spend on moving through the terrain. So you got to spend a major action from the crew to get through the difficult terrain with momentum if you don't have momentum already. Hazardous terrain is also potentially damaging, crossed by spending momentum or adding threat as normal, but if you choose to add threat, the threat is spent immediately to inflict damage on the ship or impose a negative trait, and the nature of that is determined by the nature of the hazard. Then we have prepare for battle. So there's a nice note here about battling very large adversaries like the Borg. They possess spacecraft and space stations that are way bigger than any Starfleet starship. So game masters have a few options here. They can take all the turns allocated to the NPCs. So if you have a scale 10 monstrosity, you can take all 10 turns in a round. This would take a lot of time though. If you want things to go a bit quicker, you can take turns equal to the player's total turns. Give them a sort of fighting chance against the big vessel. Or you can take as many turns as you see fit up to the maximum allowed in the narrated taste. So that's better if you want to focus on generating interesting dramatic rounds rather than just focusing on the detail of the stats on the sheet. So minor actions can be taken by characters on a starship during combat, as can major actions. And you have your leadership direct action as per normal combat, personal combat. And you can also have your momentum spends. You can spend 2 momentum to attempt a second major action, but it increases the difficulty by 1. Talking on the ship is a free action, so you don't need to worry about that. Then you have different positions on the ship, which allow you to do different things. So you have the command position, communications, flight controller or helmsman, navigator, operations, which is monitoring internal systems like damage control, transporters, etc., etc., sensor operators, and tactical, which is your weapons and shields. Each character may only take a single station during their turn, and you cannot take actions from a specific station if another character is already there. Certain actions, evasive action and defensive fire, allow the crew to turn an attack against their ship into an opposed task. If you used evasive action, you can't use defensive fire until after the effects of evasive action have ended, however. You can't use them both at the same time. Damage for starships is just resolved like an extended task, so attacks and other hazards have a damage rating, which is typically between 1 and 6, although some very powerful weapons might have an even higher number. The ships have a certain number of shields, and they protect the ship from damage. Cover and concealment are common effects and represent objects that interfere with the vessel's ability to see or target an object, so cover can often be circumvented, though, by attacking from a different direction, or displacing the cover using force or blowing it up. At the start of a scene, ship's shields return to their maximum value, but the ships have 2 breakthrough points, which are marked on an example shield track, one about halfway along rounded up, and 1/3 of the way along rounded up. And most ships also have a quantity of resistance, which reduces total damage received. If the ship is shaken, it suffered minor damage or disruption. And the ship's captain or highest ranking character aboard randomly determines or chooses one option from the following list. So it could be brace for impact. On the next turn taken on the ship, they may not take a major action. It could be losing power, so you lose the use of reserve power. And the next time you attempt to regain power, the difficulty increases by 1. Casualties, minor damage, means the ship suffers a complication, or roll again. So there's really 3 options here. I think it's more entertaining if you don't allow the players to choose, personally. I'd rather, as a GM, make them roll for it, because it feels like a step too far in narrative control in a combat for me, but that's just up to personal taste. We have breaches. So a breach is a trait that represents serious damage to the ship and or crew, and is associated with the system of the ship struck by the attack. So its usual effect is to increase the difficulty of tasks attempted or make some tasks impossible. So multiple identical traits can be combined to create a potent trait, as we know from before. As breaches are a form of trait, this can be a useful way to handle especially severe damage. When it comes to repairing these potent breaches, you can either multiply the time taken to attempt repairs by the trait's potency, or turn a simple task into an extended task. If a single system to your ship suffers a number of breaches equal to or greater than half the ship's scale, that system has been destroyed, and any task which would be assisted by that system automatically fails. If your ship suffers a number of breaches greater than the ship's scale, then the ship has suffered critical damage and can no longer function, and if you take any more damage after that, your ship is destroyed. At the Game Master's discretion, NPC vessels suffering critical damage are destroyed immediately. We've got a little sidebar here about catastrophic damage. So if a ship suffers critical damage and the ship's engine system has been destroyed, the warp reactor could suffer a loss of containment and could explode at any moment. You roll a d20 at the end of each round. If you roll higher than the ship's engineering rating, the reactors explode, destroying the ship, killing everyone, and inflicting X damage with the piercing quality to all of the ships within close range, where X is the exploding ship's scale plus 1. You can avoid this result by stabilizing the reactor or ejecting it. If you stabilize it, it's an extended task with a progress track equal to the ship's engines and a base difficulty of 3, and you use either daring or control plus engineering to get successes on that from the engineers. If you eject the reactor, you do daring plus engineering with a difficulty of 2. Success means that you ejected the reactor. If ejected, you continue to roll to see if it explodes. When it does, it will not destroy the ship outright, but all ships, including the one that ejected it within close range, will suffer damage when it detonates. If the ship has suffered critical damage or is otherwise in a desperate spot, the captain can give the order to abandon ship. There are a large number of escape pods, and they can allow you to evacuate and get to a nearby planet or something else. So boarding and launching an escape pod requires a change position minor action, then you do a daring plus con task with a difficulty of 0. Up to 4 people can be in each pod, or up to 6 if necessary. For the rest of the crew, it can be assumed that at least half the personnel escaped the ship by the end of the round in which the abandoned ship order was given. The other half will leave in the following round. What will happen after the ship has been abandoned is up to the Game Master to decide. Now, when a ship has suffered breaches, characters can attempt to take tasks to repair the damage. These will not be full repairs, that would take time and resources not readily available in battle, but you can use redundancies and backups and rerouting things to try and minimize the impact of damage or come up with impromptu solutions. Long-term repairs, so that's time-consuming. You'll need to do that sort of off-screen between adventures typically, or if you need to do it during an ongoing moment in the campaign, then a single breach is repaired within 6 hours of work. There's no task roll needed if the work can happen undisturbed. If there's peril or time pressure, the Game Master demands for a task roll, control plus engineering, difficulty 3, reduced to 2 if that breach was patched, taking about 6 hours to complete. A ship can carry out any number of simultaneous repairs equal to the ship's engineering rating. Being docked at a properly equipped station or star base reduces the difficulty of these tasks by 2 and allows them to be completed in half the time. Now back to damage control. So this is a major action that you take, representing a character sending a repair team to handle the repairs. However, this is not the only way. You can also use the change position minor action to move elsewhere in the ship. You can head to the site of the damage and attempt to do it personally. Then you do daring plus engineering. Regardless of which method, the difficulty will be set by the breach suffered. This will normally be 2, but will increase by 1 for each additional breach to the same system. Damage control that's successful will remove the penalties imposed by a breach, but cannot remove the breaches that caused them themselves. The repairs patch the breach, which is referred to above in the long-term repairs. And they give a nice example here of Starship combat. So overall, I think the Starship combat rules are an improvement in 2E. I still miss combat dice or conflict dice because it added that extra element of randomness. A big torpedo salvo wasn't guaranteed huge damage, but instead we've got set damage. A bit unfortunate from my point of view, but I can understand why they went for it for simplicity. I do, however, think the Starship combat in general is much easier to understand. It's explained much better in this edition, and the use of reserve power being limited to just a few things makes it more intuitive for players to think about how to use that in combat. And this combat example is quite nicely laid out as well. Then we have a nice set of charts here on the back. So the narrative flow chart, how things will happen in a narrative scene. Common NPC qualities like extraordinary attribute X, so they get an automatic successes on tasks using that attribute. Fast recovery means that you can roll a d20. If you roll equal to or under the creature's fitness, the NPC immediately removes an injury. The creature can also have immune to X, so it could be immune to things like vacuum, temperature extremes, disease, etc. Initiative X, so most creatures will have initiative 1. If they have a higher number, that means they may take more than one turn around. Menacing X, that means they immediately add X threat. And resilient, if they suffer an injury, roll a d20. If it's equal to or under the creature's fitness, that injury is not inflicted. You do that before deciding whether or not to avoid injury. And then we have our example difficulty chart and personal weapon qualities as well, so handy reference on the back there. Next up, inside the box, we have the mission, the 3-part campaign, which we will look at in the usual way, which is to say I will flip through it and show you some tantalizing glimpses, but we won't talk about it in detail. This is a nice 3-part campaign, much like in the starter set for 1E. Get a good few sessions of play out of this one. So the overall campaign is called Infinite Combinations, and it's in 3 parts: Incursion Point, Dare to be Wise, and whatever should be done must be done. Then some additional mission briefs as well that give you some ideas on how to continue from this campaign. So there's summaries of the 3 parts, some ideas on how to start play, and then we get into Act 1, Incursion Point. It's subdivided into acts, and then within those you have scenes. So they really make it maximally easy for the players and GMs to play through. What needs to be done for each moment in the scene is laid out for you. You can tell the players what tasks to do. They give you maps that you can use as well if they're helpful for the players. They give you the details of any NPCs that are important. Here we have a Bryozoan Devourer. Then we have these little yellow boxes that give you a bit of rules text that you can convey to the players to help everybody learn. So everything's really laid out in a way to ensure that you really can just play this out of the box without needing to spend a huge amount of time. And then we have some Starship action coming in here. Some Profit and Persuasion. Act 3 of Chapter 1, The Fate of Cosmic 6. We've got a Bryozoan Terror. Sounds bad. And we have Dare to be Wise. They mention as well in each act how you can move this to other eras. So this is intended to be 23rd century, but you can move it to other eras like the 24th century for next generation era stuff. You don't really need to do much, just change your ships and characters and make sure that you adjust the equipment and so forth to match the era. Then they have the directives for the mission, the prelude, and then we get into our scenes within the act. And again, key tasks for the players are laid out so the GM will know what to say. And we have our NPC stats, and again, key tasks are laid out. We've got details that you can tell the players if they spend momentum, and conclusions, as well as the first extended task example. Again, adapting to other eras, and the directives for Chapter 3, and we get into our acts here as well. Messages from Starfleet. We've got a lovely picture of an Akira class in the asteroid field there. Another extended task to deal with. Into the Shadow Maw Nebula. And we have tips for making starship combat easier, and a Nausicaan scout ship to encounter. So it's nice, the campaign gives you exposure to all the primary areas of the rules, really. Of course, the core rulebook has much more detail and a lot more equipment and everything like that, plus all your space frames. But this really gives you a pretty good picture of how the system plays as a whole. Again, we have some more extended tasks. Again, I think the extended tasks were more exciting with the combat dice, but that's another personal taste issue. Then we have some more space combat, space map as well for the conflict, which is nice. And conclusion, then we have our mission briefs. So these contain just the basic sort of overall high-level outline for a Star Trek Adventures mission. So you get your title, suggested era of play, suggested spotlight role, player character that the mission brief will really focus on. So you can get some character-focused episodes and character arcs worked into your overall campaign. A synopsis, an opening captain's log entry, major plot beats, minor plot beats, key NPCs, and a conclusion, and advice on how to fit it into the campaign. So we got a mission brief called Behind the Glass, then we got Sour Deals. Finally, we've got the 53rd Annual Bioarchaeology Conference. And there you go, that is your campaign book in a quick flash there. So there's a lot of playtime. It's good value for the money. I do miss having the physical maps, though, since there are a couple of maps in the book. It would have been nice if they'd given us those as physical objects like they did in the 1E starter set. But the 1E starter set didn't have enough dice in it, so it seems, they never give me everything I want in these things. Only Free League manages that feat. Then we have our character and ship sheets, which are on this lovely, nice, laminated, thick paper here. So we have the USS Challenger NC 2023, which we saw in the Quickstart as well. As a Constitution class, we have our system and department ratings, various attacks, which include phaser banks, photon torpedoes, and a tractor beam of strength 3. It's got talents as a command ship, it's got modular laboratories, a rugged design, and secondary reactors, which help with additional rerouting power, and it can saucer separate. On the flip side, we have Starship Standard Minor Actions, Starship Standard Major Actions, and General Major Actions that are possible on a Starship. So really handy reference there on the back of each of these. Commodore Nella Zen, they recommend that one of the players take the role of the Commodore. Now, this can be interesting because commanding officers, without fail, in Star Trek, they work as part of a team and they're magnanimous. So they, whenever there's a crisis aboard the Enterprise, you see the captain go to his ready room or to a conference room and discuss with all the higher-ranking officers what they should do, and they work on a plan together. And that's the way that you should remind your players to behave if they are playing the Commodore in these scenarios. So she's got her focuses, her values and traits as a Trill. She's got her species abilities, including patient and joined as a Trill. And as she's a veteran officer, she has the ability to roll a d20, and if she rolls less than her control rating, she regains a point of determination if she just spent it. And on the flip side, we have a summary of actions for command characters and for comms as well, which is really handy, including the use of transporters. Commander Xanthus Thorvik, he is an Andorian. He's got a demeanor as icy as Andoria itself as one of his values, but he's interested in hand-to-hand combat, infiltration, shipboard tactical systems, small craft, and survival. So he's a good security officer. He's got his Ushantor here, which is listed amongst his attacks, but is deadly, so you got to watch out for the threat escalation there. He is intense, which is species ability. He also has the Ushan ability, so when he makes a melee attack or is targeted by a melee attack and buys one or more DT20s by adding to threat, he may reroll any number of dice in his dice pool for the task. Further, he can use the Ushantor as a blade and it counts as a standard issue, so he's always got that. And then we have tactical, minor, and major actions, as he is the tactical officer with his red shirt for security. And he's got a nice diagram of phaser here as well. Then we have Dr. Viral. She is the medical officer. She's a Vulcan. She has focuses in computers, emergency medicine, genetics, infectious disease, philosophy, and psychiatry. She has a phaser type 2, but obviously she'd prefer to heal injuries rather than inflict them. So she's got great mental discipline as a Vulcan, as well as mind melding. She's got a good bedside manner. She can deal with cutting-edge medicine. And she's got Studious, which helps her ask additional questions when spending momentum to obtain information. And on the back, we have the core mechanic, personal weapon qualities, recovering, stress, and healing, which are obviously very relevant to her as a character. So it's a little bit interesting. On the back of these sheets, we have references, but there's some mixing of things. We have things relevant to the character, plus some general stuff as well. Then we have Lieutenant Commander Burke Van Jaxa. He's a Tellarite. He's got focuses in computers, reverse engineering, Starfleet protocol, rhetoric, transporters, and warp drive. He's really all about engineering. He's also sturdy against stun attacks. He's very incisive, and he can jury-rig repairs, and he's also good with transporters. So an excellent engineer, Lieutenant Commander Burke Van Jaxa. On the back, we have operations and engineering major actions, sensor operations minor actions, and sensor operations major actions, which again are relevant to this class of character. And then we have Lieutenant Zoe Hernandez. She's a human. What I like here is that finally, in most games, humans are just the bog standard. They don't have any special quality, but here they have the Faith of the Heart species ability. So humans have an irrepressible drive to explore, and when she uses one of her values to spend or gain determination, she may also add one momentum to the group pool. She's also got computer expertise, a dedicated focus in botany, done the reading, so she can spend one momentum immediately to use science on a task instead of a department that she would normally use. She can also test theories, attempting a task using engineering or science. The first bonus D20 she purchases is free. Pretty cool. And on the back, we have operations and engineering major actions, and again, sensor operations, minor and major actions. Then Lieutenant Junior Grade Rashid Kamal. So junior officers, instead of having the veteran quality, they have untapped potential. So whenever Kamal succeeds at a task for which he bought one or more additional dice by any means, roll 1d20 after the roll. If the roll is equal to or less than his daring, gain a bonus momentum. However, if the roll is higher, you add 1 threat instead. But he's a human, so he also has the Faith of the Heart species ability. Attack run, which means he's better at the attack pattern major action on a starship. He is bold when he's doing security tasks, and he can push the limits. He's a great pilot, basically, and you can see that from his focuses as well. And his pastime is skateboarding, which I didn't know they still had in the 23rd century, but there you go. Then we have Ensign Laniar Tenen, the most junior officer. So he loves communications technology, protocol, starship tactical systems, the universal translator, psychology, and other things, and also code breaking as a hobby. He is also telepathic because he's a betazoid. Backup plans, so when he or an ally fails a task, he may add 1 momentum to the group's momentum pool as a consolation prize. He's good at collaboration. He can spend 1 momentum to allow an ally to use his rating in engineering in one of his focuses. He's got technical expertise for tasks assisted by the ship's computers or sensors, and he's got untapped potential, being that he's only an ensign. And he's got command major actions and comms major actions on the back. So he's best at the command, comms, or transporter stations. And then we have a general set of reference sheets, which are really great. An overall reference for the core mechanic, personal weapon qualities, recovering stress, recovery, and healing, all in one place. Then we've got your major actions during combat, your minor actions, your determination spends as well. Then we have how you attempt an attack and how you resolve them, dealing with injuries and stress and avoiding injuries. And on the flip side, we have a personal conflict momentum spends, your injury and complications, how assistance works in combat, and the use of protection. Then we've got starship conflicts, so starship attack and how you resolve it, including hitting a random system. Targeting solutions minor action allows you to select a system instead of rolling it. And they remind you that talking is free action and that ships can suffer collision damage equal to the ship's scale plus half the number of zones moved before the collision, and has devastating and piercing qualities. And if a ship is ramming, then the ramming vessel gains the intense quality as well. So, ouch. On the other side, we have starship damage, so you determine damage. You reduce it by 1 for each point of resistance to a minimum of 1. So any attack that is successful will always do a minimum of 1 damage. A lot of people forget that. And complications may reduce your damage by 1 for each complication suffered. Then you apply damage. If the shields are at half or less, you'll be shaken. 25, you'll be shaken if you weren't before. If you're already shaken, then you'll get a breach instead as damage punches through the shields. When the shields are down, then the ship will suffer a breach. And you have your starship combat momentum spends, minor damage results on the table. Then we've got the breaches card, so the nature of the breach and the different sections. So this is fun. They give you detailed breach possibilities. You roll a d20 when you get a breach for a certain department, and this will generate thematic descriptions and traits to affect the ship system. So you have, for example, for the engines, a 1 to 4 gives you damage to the impulse engines. 5 to 8 gives you damage to the reaction control thrusters, so it's harder to move around obstacles. 9 to 12 damages the EPS grid, the electroplasma system, so that results in power failures, injuries to personnel, fires, or all 3. 13 to 16 damages the warp nacelles, which means you can't fly at warp speeds, and you can get fires, plasma leaks, or dangerous radiation leaks. And finally, 17 to 20 damages the warp core. It could be very dangerous. It could result in being left without main power or a containment failure. Breaches like that for all the different sections are narratively relevant to that area of the ship. Computers, engines, then structure, sensors, and weapons. And talk about what a breach is, how to repair them, what happens when a system is destroyed, and the use of potent traits. So there you go. That is the Star Trek Adventures 2nd Edition starter set. I think overall, I consider it slightly better than the 1E starter set. The only downside, in my view, is again that there are a couple of maps in the campaign, but we don't get those as cards as we did in 1E. And we don't get character tokens to go with. I think that's a shame. Granted, there's only 2, so it's not a huge impact. And they're really going for, the theater of mind approach, I think, in 2nd edition. They're really, in general, abstracting things a bit more. So it makes sense that they would do that in a way. But I do think it would have been nice, since they provide the maps, why not give us an actual copy or, instead of us having to print them. I like having the additional determination tokens, remind players to use them. Having all the dice you need at once is, of course, very handy, much like in Dreams and Machines. And, of course, you've got plenty of momentum and threat tokens to hand around. But yeah, the campaign, I think, is well done and well laid out, particularly for beginning GMs. I think the rules are better laid out than in 1st edition in general, and that extends to the core book as well, as we'll see in a future video. So I think if you're looking to get into 2E, this is a great place to start. The quick start, as you saw before, is also a decent way to just spend a one-shot to see if you think the system will fit your taste. If you want to try something deeper and get some actual starships in your Star Trek game, then you pick up the starter box and you will have your opportunities to get to learn how starships work and how to use them and how to fight with them, which is great. So at the price that I got this, which was I believe £23, it definitely felt worth the cost. The quality of the components is high, the box is nice, thick, and sturdy, and the campaign seems good and well suited for beginning players. So overall, I think it's a worthy purchase. My overall assessment of 2E is still, a little bit pluses and minuses. I think it's a little bit down to taste at this point, but we'll talk more about that when we look at the core rules in a future video coming soon. So hope you enjoyed this and hope you found this review useful. If you go out and pick up the starter set for Star Trek Adventures 2E, let me know what you think in the comments below. If you have any further questions about what I've said or shown you, do feel free to ask. I'll let you know about how I've experienced these materials myself or point you to other resources that may be helpful. And if you like what you saw, please click like and subscribe and click the little bell thingy so you see when my next videos come out. And if you really want to help me in a more direct way, then feel free to click the Ko-fi link below to buy me a cup of coffee or donate towards the cause of me maintaining my ridiculous RPG collection, which is slowly driving me towards poverty, but it's fun, so what can you do? At any rate, thank you for joining me once again. I hope we are all doing well and you enjoyed the video, and I hope to see you in the next video as well. So take care, see you soon, and bye-bye.